Hey everyone, happy Saturday. I'm talking today about judgment and forgiveness and how and why they go hand in hand. Judgment is a really tough emotion to have. I think we can all say we have judged an aspect of somebody or self at some point. And I know that I've struggled with judgment a lot. I think I've sat in the seat of judgment of others in my past a lot and probably still struggle with that to this day. So I'm talking partly from experience and not of judgment of people in judgment. That would be too touche. Judgment and forgiveness. So judgment is where maybe you feel that something's happened in your life, maybe to you, by somebody else, at the hands of somebody else. And where forgiveness comes in is that we can then sit in a lack of forgiveness towards somebody or a situation or a memory because we're sitting in judgment of maybe what that person has perceivably done to us. Now, the issue with that is we can stay in a state of unforgiveness for a very long time if we're sitting in judgment of another person. And really, we're poisoning ourselves. It's not really about setting that other person free. It's about setting ourselves free. And sometimes when we dig deeply, we may struggle to forgive somebody because we're in judgment of their behavior. We're in judgment of something they've done and we're holding them framed in that judgment thereon, and then we can't forgive them, and then we're poisoning ourselves because we're sat with an awful feeling towards that person that actually we're carrying. It's not really touching them. It might do on some level. They might be sitting in all kinds of angst that we can't forgive them, but what is it that stops us forgiving them in the first place tends to be judgment. So it might be that we're judging that person on something they've done, as in a behaviour. So we now see that person as that behaviour. But as hard as this can be, as a bitter pill to swallow, people aren't their behaviours. Now that can make people really frustrated to hear that, because they may think, well, they are that because they did that. Well, no, they're still not. When we're born, we're technically born a blank canvas to forge out and create any personality traits and behaviours we choose. It doesn't always work as easily as that, because we then can actually develop personality traits and behaviours because of a consequence of things we've gone through that might not be pleasant. But if we're born technically a blank canvas, and we develop personality traits and behaviours that may not be too favourable, we're not actually those behaviours. We're with this thing that we were born, blank canvas, and we develop behaviours to cope. We develop behaviours because we've been through trauma, and we might carry on acting those things out to cope, or because we're replaying a traumatic experience. We might even be quite underdeveloped in our self-awareness, where we don't know we've got behaviours. I've certainly been guilty of that so much in my life. My blind spots, my shadows, maybe I didn't want to look at them. Maybe it took me a long time to discover some of them and they had to be pointed out through other people. Hey, maybe people have had judgment towards me and lack of forgiveness. That's certainly been true. But if we want to be able to get past judgment, we need to learn to forgive. And in order to be able to forgive, we often need to look at, are we judging somebody? Because if we can't forgive somebody, we may not be able to let go of something that's happened. But if we start to reframe that and consider that people are not their behaviours, they are human beings underneath that, and we can look past the behaviour just for a moment, because it might be that person's done something horrendous. They might well have, and they might have owned it, but they might not have. You know, that's another situation. I mean, how do we work with that? But this is theoretically that person is not their behaviour. What happened to them to lead them to behave like that? Are they aware they've behaved like that? Have you told them that, you know, have you called them on their behaviour? There's so many things there. Sometimes it's not always about reconciling forgiveness or judgment with that person either. I'm a strong believer that sometimes you've got to reconcile it in yourself. You know, it may not even be a conversation that needs to be had, or a conversation with that person about something years ago might be entirely destructive and bring a lot more mess or karma to the situation than would be. So sometimes we just have to be, how can I find peace in this situation without involving that person? I might not ever want to speak to that person again. So how am I going to deal with that then? So I've been looking for myself in my own past, reflecting on these things of how do we truly forgive. I realised I came up against a massive hurdle of judgment. In fact, actually, it was a download from Spirit that told me where I was blocked, and I had no idea it was judgment. So now I've got all that beautiful work to do on how do I learn to fully forgive aspects of my past that I might have played a part in too, unless I look at judgment. And I need to look at where I'm judging a person's behaviour and release judgment, release that want to look at them in a negative light and just look at them as a human being. Without that, can I still forgive them? Somebody once said to me, and it's taken years to integrate this, and I've still got work to do on it. Can you fly through the eye of the needle and let go of everything that's hurt you and forgive those who have hurt you the most? Wow, what a life journey of lesson that is. But ultimately, it wasn't about setting those people free. It was about setting me free from what I carry, my demons. So it is about me wanting to get to forgiveness, but looking at what my blocks were that was allowing me to stop and prevent myself from feeling forgiveness. And I have chosen to sit with judgment of others rather than to go to that hurtful wound. And when I fully address what my judgments are, which is looking at a person's behavior and associating them as that behavior rather than looking at them as a human being and seeing that that behavior is a part of them, a part of what they did, but it isn't who they are as a whole. If I can look at their whole person without that just for a moment, I might start to get clarity, and I might be able to feel within myself forgiveness to my past. Hope that helps.